Hey, let's take a look at how to get started as a web developer in 2017 and take a look at what tools and things you need to do to begin. Let's take a look. So first, you need to ask yourself what the end goal is in mind. I'm big about goal planning and making sure that I reach my goals. So if I'm going to start to learn a new technology or learn something as big as coding or programming or web development, I need to know why I'm doing this. And this is going to affect how you learn. So if your goal is to get a job, then you need to learn the technologies and the techniques of the job that you're trying to get. If you're just creating a website for a friend for his wedding, then you may not need to go through all the steps I'm outlining in the next few slides here. So just keep that in mind. What's your goal? Write it down. And so that way you can measure if you achieve that goal at the end. Just kind of having a broad goal of I just want to learn web development, I think is not as important as writing a specific goal of why you want it. So you may want to even go a little bit deeper. I want to learn web development, so I want to get a job. Well, why do you want to get a job? Well, I want to support my family. What's wrong with the job I have now? So just keep asking yourself those why questions. So in 2017, there's lots and lots of ways to learn how to do web development. So the three most popular ones are college, coding boot camps, and you can self-teach yourself. So we're going to talk a little about this, and then we're going to get into a little bit more specifics. So if you want to be a developer of any kind, really, college is always a great option because employers like degrees. If you're applying for any Fortune 500 company as a programmer, unless you have experience, you need to have a degree of some sort. And if you go through a 4-year education and get from accredited university and you get a degree, especially a computer science degree, that is going to help you in the job search. And there's something to say about the college experience. So a lot of people may disagree with this, but you have the college, it's definitely an experience for people. It's a lot of times the first time kids get out of their parents' homes. They're different in different environment. So I think that's important. Now, the haters out there would say that college isn't worth it at all. It's super expensive, especially if you can't get financial aid or you don't want to be in debt or you can't get any scholarships, then it is an expensive option for you. And if you are looking to be a web developer, web development, you're probably going to be looking at the CS curriculum, which isn't going to teach you the basics of JavaScript. I mean, there might be some classes related to web development, if depending on the structure of your university, and sometimes undergrad or sometimes graduate students teach some of those more popular ones. But you're going to learn the fundamentals of computer science, which is very math heavy and intensive. And it doesn't teach you to become a programmer per se, but it does teach you those type of skills like algorithms, things that would help you on interviews, but they're not going to help you create a web page necessarily. So you got to keep that in mind. So a coding bootcamp is really popular right now. There's so many of them. I'm going to make a video in the future of some of the more popular ones that I like. And there's different types of online coding bootcamps that you don't even have to leave your house to do. And then there's in-person boot camps, and there's ones in San Francisco, New York. They're all over the place. So they're very structured. Usually there can be anywhere between a couple weeks to a few months. Some of them, the more intensive ones like Hack Reactor, you're almost doing it 7 days a week for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. They're very structured. They have a very focused on what you should learn, and these are by industry experts that teach these classes. And a lot of these programs help you get jobs. So they'll go over how to interact with interviewers, what kind of common questions that you'll see in a programming interview. Especially in larger companies, you get algorithm type questions. So they're going to go over like what's the common algorithm type questions you might get. And then they're also going to force you to create products and websites and things like that you might have to do on the job, and they'll help you create portfolio. So they're great in that way. But like a college, they are expensive. Some coding boot camps are almost the same price as 4-year colleges, or at least 1 or 2 years of that. So you have these coding boot camps that could be $15,000, $20,000. So they are expensive. And it doesn't guarantee you a job. So a lot of A lot of people think that that coding bootcamp, it's almost a shoo-in, but it doesn't guarantee you a job. You're not really, once you come out of 4 years, or excuse me, once you come out of a coding bootcamp, you're not a web developer. You're not a programmer. You just have some of the basic skills. And when you get into a real job, you're going to realize all the stuff you didn't know. So it's still difficult. You still have to work hard. And then the last type, which a lot of people probably listen to this, watching this right now, can relate to, is just being self-taught. It's the cheapest of all of these 3 different ways of learning. You can customize your curriculum to exactly what you want to learn. And there's a lot of hybrids of this too, where you might buy a cheap course for like, I don't know, $20 or maybe even $100, which won't give you that kind of one-on-one that you might get in a college or coding bootcamp, but it'll kind of give you a little bit more structure and where to go. Because that's probably one of the biggest cons, is that it's really hard to know where to start and what you should learn. If you're Googling, all the information's out there, but you're going to have to be pretty adept at finding it. So you're going to have to be really good at Googling all the different subjects and looking all around. And yeah, it's not easy. And of course, you have to be a very disciplined person. You're going to have to be the type of person that is going to be able to get up a couple hours early every day and study and write web pages that no one will look at and write code that no one will ever see. And that you're going to have to keep doing that over and over again. You're going to have to skip watching Netflix every night, and you're going to have to just be there and coding and learning. You're going to join these community groups. So it's not for everyone, and it's a difficult road for a lot of people. It seems easy to self-teach yourself something, but coding, once you get past some of the fundamentals, becomes a little bit more complex, and it's not for everyone. So having more structured may be easier for some people. On the other hand, some people, they couldn't have it any other way. And there's no real better way of doing this. I prefer colleges and a traditional CS program, but you can make arguments for all 3 of why any one of these ways are better. So now we're going to the actual basics of what you should learn when you start. So we're going to talk about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, web, client server, and tools. So with the web, you want to learn the basics of how the internet works. You want to know a little bit about IP addresses. How is it when you go to a web page and you put in a URL at the top, how does that get over to the server, wherever it is? How does that IP address, or how does the domain name change to an IP address? How does that information get back to your browser? You just want to know a little bit about the fundamentals of how that works, how clients are on the browser side, how the servers are on the server side, and how that information gets moved over. If you get into it even more, you may want to learn about different HTTP status codes, how the methods, how information in the headers get moved from one place to the other. But this is kind of a quick starter guide on that. And you can even just look up, spend a couple hours, and you probably get a good idea of most of this. The next thing you'd want to learn is HTML, CSS. HTML is hypertext markup language. It's not a programming language. It's just a way to describe the information that your web browser displays. You want to learn tags and all the common tags for HTML. Then, more importantly, and if you like the design part of this world, like you like to create pictures and you like to create views and the user experience side of things, you may want to get really heavily into the cascading style sheets, or also known as CSS, which helps to style different elements on your page. And there's a lot of ways to do that. In the JavaScript side, you want to learn about variables, loops, objects, conditionals, functions, events. So everything that you'd want to learn is really the fundamentals of JavaScript. And really a lot of different languages use these constructs of variables and loops. And this will give you an idea how to take the data that's on your website and how to manipulate it. And especially with events, if you have a button on your web page and someone clicks on it, that would be an event that you can then do something with in your JavaScript. So you'd want to learn how this works. And by no means is JavaScript the nicest language at all. There's actually a book called JavaScript: The Good Parts, because you can argue that there is some bad parts of JavaScript that you should not learn. And JavaScript's a programming language that is changing. So ES6 is probably the latest, but it's ES 2016's latest, but there is more coming up the pipeline, so it is constantly changing and getting better. You want to learn some basic tools of your trade. So there's development environments, integrated development environments. Commonly we use, sometimes called text editors. There's some text editors that are just pure text editors that aren't really using for development, that won't give you some of the nice things that other things give you. Like there's Notepad++ and TextPad, which you can just use to take text and manipulate it. But if you wanted to have more, a little bit better syntax highlighting, you might try to use something like Atom or Sublime, where there's a lot of different plugins that can make it real easy to create your programs out of, and you can load your whole program in. I like Vim. I use Vim with plugins when I'm just remoted into a website somewhere, and I use the key bindings for that. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means. There's a lot more out there that I didn't mention. Of course, you want to get used to the browsers and the different development utilities in each. There's Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari I didn't mention. If you're doing mobile development, you want to get used to how the mobile browsers work as well, and how your web pages will work on that. And it's something that could be talked about in a different tutorial. And there's Photoshop, and there's a bunch of different tools to actually take your elements if you're more interested in the graphical side and how you can manipulate them and show them on the screen. And then after you learn some of those basics I just talked about, you have a good idea of why you want to learn web development. You've decided that you want to maybe self-teach yourself, or there's combinations between self-teaching and taking some of these self-teaching and more structured learning. And then you're learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you're creating basic web pages, but you want to go to the next step. You have a cornucopia of options and things you can learn. And this is where it gets a little dicey. And I'm not going to get into all these in depth, but you can learn different frameworks. I teach on this channel a lot about Ember.js. I've taught some on Vue as well, and a little bit of React. And those are just different front-end frameworks, but there's a lot more that you can learn. There's libraries like jQuery too. We didn't really touch on the back end, but there's a lot of different frameworks and programming languages that you can use for the for the back end, like Ruby on Rails, Django, Node. I use something based off of Elixir called Phoenix in a couple of my tutorials. And then PHP is really big in the WordPress world. A lot of websites are made with PHP. There's CSS preprocessors, so we're talking about Sass, Less, Stylus. We can take the CSS that we just made and we can style it and write it in a different way that might be easier for you to write in, because CSS it doesn't have all the advantages of variables and things like that of other, CSS isn't a language, but you can kind of use Sass and Less to be able to style your CSS easier. You have templating engines like Handlebars and Pug that makes it easier to display your information on your screen. I know Ember.js uses something called HTML bars, which uses these curly braces to insert information from your server and from your front end. There's task runners. So task runners can do a lot of things for you. It can take your code. It can do something called linting, which looks for different errors. You can do minification. So if that kind of takes all your information and puts it in one file, you can add some helpful tools so that way when you're working, that your browser automatically refreshes when things change. And then you can have a whole workflow so that way when you have your program, your website, that on every single build you can do some kind of continuous integration where every time someone checks something in, that these tasks get run, that the linting gets done, that the program's all created, and there's a lot more to that. And then there's something called testing, which is you should be able at some point to start to test your code. And some popular programs, frameworks to use that are Mocha, Jasmine, and QUnit. I guess it'll be libraries. So that'll take you some time. And after you kind of get through all that, you have time to really market your skills. And this kind of goes back to your reason why. If you're looking to get a job, which I'm assuming a lot of people are, then you should probably take some time to do some of these things. Throughout your learning process, throughout learning JavaScript, HTML, creating web pages, you want to keep on creating. You want to put your stuff out there. Sign up for a free GitHub account. Start posting stuff to GitHub. Create a personal website for yourself. One person, Jennifer Dewalt, one of the ways she learned was she created 180 websites in 180 days. I'll link that in the description below. So it's kind of an interesting story. And every day she was committed to do one more website. And it was always different than the last website. And she was learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and trying to learn all these things at once. Don't be afraid to apply for jobs. You might get rejected. It'll probably happen. That's fine. So just keep on applying for jobs. You might find someone that wants to hire a junior dev or someone that's learning because they know they could probably pay you less, but they can also help you in your career. There's tons of different networking events. Almost every city has a meetup for programmers, WordPress developers, JavaScript developers, Angular, React. If you look at your local meetup.com or just Google groups in your town, if you have a co-working space, I'm sure you can find some. But it's good to kind of go to some of those events just to get an idea of what other people are working on. And a lot of times they have job openings or people mention different jobs that are opening. And knowing someone when you're applying for a job makes it a lot easier to get. It's still difficult as a beginner web developer, but it will be easier than if you just randomly send out a resume to an HR person that will just throw it in the waste bin because you misspelled some word on your resume. And there's a whole different world of personal branding. So I kind of mentioned creating a website, but you can create a personal blog where you update it every week or every other day on what you're working on. It's actually really helpful. It kind of gives you another reason to learn because you know that you have to post it on a web page. And if you get lucky enough and you keep working at it, you might actually build a little bit of influence in your space. So if you wanted to learn Ruby on Rails and you started posting on Ruby on Rails, what you've been learning, and maybe even deep diving into a subject that you find really interesting, let's say authentication, and you were writing about that every day, that could actually build some authority for you after a while because Google will start picking up those blogs, people will start searching for it, they'll come to your website, and it could be beneficial for you. It might lead to some leads on different jobs. Of course, there's LinkedIn, which is always good to put up your information. There's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You could easily put a profile on each one of those, start talking about this web development topics that you're interested in. You can join different Facebook groups, try to help other people out. And then you'd have to definitely work at it, but this could be a way of sort of getting into that job market that you're interested in. And being different is always really good. Like Jennifer Dewalt with 180 websites in 180 days. If you can think of something interesting, like maybe even create an open source project that you're really interested in, even if you're a junior dev, you might find that other people are interested in that. Or you could contribute to another open source project that's really interesting to you and take a look at that. So last thing, good luck. This is not easy. This is going to be very difficult. If you like this video, please click the subscribe button and let us know in the comments below, how did you get into web development? How did you start learning? Thanks.